This is kind of a new one on me. Like I said, when we logged in here, I was like, oh man, this feels like we're about to play D&D. We've been using Zoom to play D&D, but regardless, that's not why we're here today. Alan, why are we here today?
We're here today to talk about Patreon, and I closed my notes, so there we go.
Going great so far.
Going great so far. Sorry. I guess we're going to talk about how to set up your Patreon or what it is. I guess that would be a good place to start.
Why don't we start off with who are you? And
oh yeah, that's a better place to start.
Why do you think you know anything about Patreon?
My name is Alan Panakal, and I have a series called Ancient Ones. All my information's on ancientones.net. And I know some stuff about Patreon because I've been running my Patreon for about 2 years now.
Nice.
So it took me a minute to get it going, but you know, it's a slow burn, but it's getting there. I've got, I believe I have about 75 patrons at this point. I had about 150 at one point. It's been fluctuating. So, yeah, I'm not an expert, but I know enough. You're probably better at it than I am. You've been on a lot longer than me.
Well, yes. So yeah, yes. And also in some ways, no. So my name is Sam Flegel. You can find my work at fatefulsigns.com. I don't know if the Mike at Eridani thing is visible to you guys down below, but we are here as a part of EridaniCon, which is a big online convention this weekend. And you're probably either watching this live or maybe even later on. And anyway, if you're watching it later, you missed out on EridaniCon. So sorry about that. But at least you get to watch this live later on. Anyway, it's been really cool to see everybody popping in and talking in the chat over on the Discord and all that stuff. So as far as Patreon goes, I've been on Patreon for 5 years with One Fantastic Week, which is a weekly web show about self-employed fantasy artists. We, when I say we, I mean me and my co-host Peter Moorbacher, we got on to Patreon within the first 6 months of Patreon existing, and it has changed a lot in the last 6 years. And then I also run my personal Patreon for my art page, which is patreon.com/Sam Flegel, if you want to go check that out. And for that, it's just focused on my art. And that's why I say in some ways I've been on it a lot, but in other ways I'm still figuring it out. And I've only been doing my personal art page for a little over a year now, I guess a year and a half. And it's a very different journey doing it with art than it is with the podcast. I actually think Patreon lends itself much more naturally to a format that comes out regularly, like One Fantastic Week or any sort of podcast. In fact, when I went to PatreCon 2 years ago out in California, which was Patreon hosted a convention event. And one of the things their personal staff said is that like the majority of their Patreon are a couple of white dudes talking online. And it's because most podcasts are just a couple of white dudes talking about the thing they love, whether it's, you know, comics or D&D or murder, you know, like it doesn't matter. There's podcasts about everything. And Patreon is how those dudes make their money. And so any sort of serialized format, it's a really natural fit because it's a way for people to support the content that they love and feel like they're a part of the show. I think it gets a little tougher when you start talking about how do you get there as an artist? How does Patreon intersect with someone who is making content, but making either 2D or 3D physical content as opposed to like a web show? So Alan, do you have any thoughts on that regard?
I mean, I find that, so like, I guess the idea of when I was just doing art period and just sharing it, I had a minimal amount of people, but when I started sharing more of my personal experiences and my stories from the series, that helped boost the amount of patrons that were starting to follow me. That might, you know, harken back to what you're saying about podcasts. Like people like stories, people like, they don't want to just look at your work. They want to know more about it. Like what was the process? What made you paint the way you painted? What made you create this piece, right? If there's a story behind it, like in your case, there's a lot of Norse mythology behind your artwork. It's very interesting to hear about that, right? You're not only seeing a beautiful piece of artwork, you're also getting this cool story that follows along with it. And if you do that consistently, like, you know, I've been trying to do 1 or 2 posts a month is what I was told to do. But, you know, it's hard.
On Patreon specifically, or is that your goal for social media?
That's my Patreon goal. Well, I mean, if you post a Patreon and then just wait, you know, what I normally do is I post a Patreon, I wait like 3 or 4 days, and then I post to all my other social medias, because technically my patrons should get to see everything first, right?
Yeah.
I used to wait like a month to share stuff, like Patreon, wait like 3 weeks to a month and then share, but that felt like the right number to me. But then I forgot if it was you or Pete or somebody said, no, man, wait like 3 days and then share it again. Your patrons have already seen it 3 days ago. Like, that's their special treat, right? They got to see the early access view of everything. So, you know, but I don't know what the magic number is there yet. 2 days a week, 2 days a month seem to work. And then now I'm going for at least 1 post a week. So it'd be 4 posts a month, you know?
Okay.
And it doesn't have to be artwork. I mean, it's sometimes it's a story from the series. Sometimes it's just something personal. Like, check out this cool band I just found, or check out this indie movie I just watched, and here's my thoughts about it. I saw like people like Iris. She would post just like personal stories on there, and people loved it. And I thought, that's interesting, because people want to hear more about you.
And I know who you mean when you say Iris. But
Iris Compete. Is that how you say her last name? Compete.
Yeah, Iris Compete.
She does post a lot of her artwork, but every once in a while she'll post a story that's personal to her. Like, you know, like she went, like got brunch. There's one time she got like a flat tire, and she wrote a whole thing about a flat tire and all her like experiences from that. And I was just like, at first I was like, you know, wow, that's a very personal story for her to post on Patreon. But then I thought, that's how people get to know you as you.
Yeah. And so, I mean, that is one way to handle your Patreon, is to really invite people in to your inner circle, in a way. I don't know if inner circle is quite the right word, but certainly to a closer level of intimacy than you might post to regular social media, where you're mostly just posting pictures of art. You can give people a window into your artistic life, which for some people is really alluring. You know, like they want to see behind the curtain, so to speak, into that. But I think we should talk a little bit about what Patreon is and how it started a little bit, which, you know, having been on the platform for so long, when they pitched us on Patreon in the beginning, it was pitched as a Kickstarter that never stops.
Correct.
And within the first year, I think they realized that was not accurate. Because, you know, Kickstarter has grown into something else, and Patreon has grown into something else. And that's the big difference, is like Kickstarter and other crowdfunding platforms are one thing, and Patreon is not that. Patreon is not crowdfunding. But, you know, it's never a great idea to define something by what it's not. So what is Patreon? Patreon is a subscription service that gets you behind the scenes into a content creator's way of making the content that you enjoy. And I think the best comparison outside of an artistic pursuit, well, I mean, I guess it is still artistic, is NPR. Every year at NPR, or I guess 3 times a year, you've been listening to NPR, you're like really into a couple of shows, and then they hit you with by the way, if you send us $1 a month, then we'll send you this tote bag for supporting NPR. Or, you know, there's some sort of gift, there's a mug, there's different levels, but they have a subscription drive. Well, that is what Patreon is for artists. Is it becomes our subscription drive as a way to remind people that if they enjoy the content coming out, and if they chip in $1 a month or $2 a month or $5 a month or whatever fits in their budget. I mean, I've had people give me $100 a month at certain levels. But then what that does is that means they are now a part of subscribing to this community and this thing, similar to NPR, where I think if you are an NPR listener, you imagine other NPR listeners to be a certain way, to be like you, you know, and to share those ideals that NPR has. And if you can create that sort of community around your art, Patreon works amazingly well to be the host platform for that subscription-based community. Alan, do you have any thoughts along those lines?
No, that was I was like, how would you describe Patreon? But that, yeah, early on, yeah, they describe it as an ongoing Kickstarter, which was not accurate. But NPR is actually a really good way to describe it.
It
yeah,
is. It's something that people understand. I mean,
yeah,
I think going back, I mean, people are used to subscribing to magazines. People have their Netflix subscription, and that's the thing. Like I think about a lot. If everyone who was following me on social media just chipped in $1 per month, then I would not have to worry about where my money comes from at all, and I could draw and paint whatever I wanted and whatever my fans, my subscribers, the members of my community were also interested in. Now, that's not where things are at for me at all. And certainly some people are friends on social media just because we actually know each other in real life, and that's a whole different thing. But, you know, on a platform like Instagram, even if half of those people were to chip in $1, I have over 7,000 followers on Instagram. That'd be over $3,000 a month. I can live on $3,000 a month. And then, you know, of course, we're still going to sell prints and originals, and, you know, it would grow from there. And so it can create a financial freedom and, you know, can go from there. Yeah, Mike C in the chat is saying that he can relate, that he helped his friend get to 75,000 followers on Instagram. Also, that's insane. 75,000 is incredible, but it didn't increase financial situation at all. So question from Sarah: how do you talk to your social following to get them to join your Patreon? That is a great question. Alan, how have you helped people move from following you on say Instagram or Facebook or wherever people follow you the most?
Twitter and Instagram seem to be my largest following for social. And what I started doing was I basically would tease some of the artwork on there. But what I started doing was posting some of the older artwork, because I forget who told me this, but someone was like, you could still share your old artwork because there's a lot of new people out there who haven't seen it.
And you can post public so that when people come to your Patreon, they see the content.
Right. Well, what I was doing was posting on social media with the stories and saying, I have a Patreon if you're interested, where I share more of these stories and more of this artwork before I post them to social media. And that seemed to like pull some people from Twitter, mainly Twitter actually, and over to, because, you know, I use, you can use Bitly to track your link clicks. And a large number of them were coming from Twitter, and they would come over to, and, you know, I would get them at the $2 tier, but, you know, $2 is fine with me. If you got like 500 people on your $2 tier, that's a decent amount of savings. You know, you can just, I'm not like I can't like pay my mortgage off the money I'm making on there, but I can definitely get groceries and gas, you know.
Joe is saying that he thinks that it was Dave Raposa who made a post about showing older art.
Maybe it was, I don't know if it was him that I saw. It's one of my friends who said it to me, but, you know, in my head, I was always like, don't share old stuff because people have seen it over. People have seen my Traveler over and over and over. And even I'm, you know, like I share him as the main piece because he's my main piece, and I felt bad about sharing him, but, you know, you'd be amazed at how many people haven't seen it, you know, like same thing. Like when you're at it's kind of like when you're at a show and somebody stops at your booth and they're like, whoa, I've never seen this stuff. And you're like, how is that possible? I've been doing this for like 5 years, you know, like it's weird that you've never seen this, but that's the same thing with social media. So, cause there's so many people on there at any given time. And then you bring them over to Patreon, then you just make sure, like I immediately, you know, I've gotten into a habit of, as soon as somebody signs up, I send them a personal message saying, thanks, you know, I appreciate your support, all the cool stuff they're about to get, you know. Yeah, did I go off tangent? I don't think
no, I think that, okay. So the thing I recommend that people do is first, like Alan's talking about, get your Patreon in order. You want to have, I'd say, at least 2 to 3 months worth of posts, so it looks like you've been operating it for a while. And the first thing you're going to do is ask your really close friends and family to back you at $1, so that when other people show up, it doesn't look empty. Because there's a certain amount of social proof with these things, where when we see other people enjoying something, we want to get in line to enjoy it too. But if you come up and it's like a ghost town, that backs people away. Even if they were all in a second ago, they're going to be like, ooh, don't want to be the first one. So, you know, it's kind of like seeding the tip jar when you work for a company. You know, you want to have a little money in the jar first. And then, you know, you're going to basically create the tote bag. So I look to NPR for this sort of thing, where you're going to come in and you're going to think of a thing. Now, I've seen it work really well with a pen. I creating like an enamel pen. Alan's going to go grab one of his real fast to show us.
Oh, I got pins here. Yeah, so I
saw you looking around. Yeah. So
well,
how did someone get that cool pin, Alan?
So what I did early on was, what was it called? Basically, I say if you sign up at any tier for this month, you get a pin sent to you. So like people could sign up on the $2 tier, $5 tier, so forth. And a lot of people got on the $2 tier, which is fine. And you kind of eat the cost on that one, but you make up for it by keeping them. They usually stick around for a couple months, right? So, and pins are not that expensive to mail out. It's like $3, $4, something like that. I was told early on, I think it was Pete who gave me that advice, was to not ship out. I mean, he used to do some large pieces for a while, but it was not to ship out anything that's too big to send out. Make it easy on yourself. So, send out as much stuff like digitally, like web wallpaper, digital wallpapers, cell phone wallpapers. I'm trying to find one of my, here. So what I started doing something small was I started sending out these metal cards, which fits my theme, right? Metal and the shine and all that stuff. But these I can like put in just an envelope, 35-cent stamp, and send it to my patrons, and they love it. So it's,
absolutely.
I do have, you can have bigger tiers and you'll get people on there, but most of the time they jump in to get that big item and then they jump out.
And so basically, and Patreon has a whole system around what they call their special offer, where you set the time limit and you just say anyone who joins at whatever level and up gets this cool thing. But it basically boils down to the same mentality of, the tote bag from NPR, the mug when you sign up. It's that, and I want to show you guys, since we're digital here and I can share my screen. Here is the solution that I used to do this same thing. I created this little commercial. It's only 20 seconds, so I'm going to play it for you guys.
Oh, yes.
Is the sound coming through?
Yeah.
The perfect accessory for a modern Viking. Get a free Faithful Signs bottle opener when you become a patron. Sign up now at patreon.com/SamFleegle. Offer ends April 30th. Don't miss it. Are you a Viking?
Oh, no, we don't need to watch it a second time. All right. So I created a pin, and I had my logo put on a little card. It's a wallet-sized credit card you slip in. And I mailed out, I don't know, like 50 of them. And then, of course, I had to order around 300 of them, but they're not crazy expensive. And so now what I do is at conventions, I tell people if they sign up at the convention, then they get one of those cards. And you know what? I didn't think about it till this moment, but since we're at EridannyCon, I will say the same thing is true. If any of you guys decide to back me on Patreon, I will mail you one of those cards. You just have to private message me and let me know that you participated in EridannyCon, and I'll mail it to you. Join at any level and you'll get one. You just got to message me. So that's how you kind of get people in, is all these people who hopefully have been following you anyways, and you give them just the tiniest little hint of an incentive to want to come through. So we got a question here from Brian Halsey that I think is good. It says, do you feel like sharing content is enough to keep patrons month over month, or do you need to offer a service as well, i.e. commissions level or a monthly offering, like in your case, a print or something each month? So what Brian's talking about is that there's the different backer levels that give different rewards. This aspect is similar to the way rewards work with a Kickstarter, but man, these rewards can be all over the place. But yes, I do think you have to have a little bit more than content to keep people, not so much at the $2 level, but I think once you start getting up to like $10 a month, someone's going to be asking, that's a Netflix subscription. What do I get for my $10 a month with Sam Flegel or Alan Panakal? You know, what does that look like? Alan, do you want to walk people through what
well,
for you?
So that's the card I showed you earlier is like an exclusive item that you can only get on Patreon. You can't get that. The only way you can get that from me at a show is if you sign up and it tells me you signed up. Same deal as Sam. If you guys sign up, message me and I'll hook you guys up with a card. But those are Patreon only exclusive cards. So that I feel like hooks people in a little bit. I did have Patreon only 11 by 17 medals too for a while, but they were really hard to ship out. So those are the things you need to consider when you're thinking about what you want to give away. How easy it is to get the product to your customers too. But yeah, that exclusive item, like people, I purposely put it out at the shows too. I have like little framed metal pieces sitting all around, the tiny ones, and the people pick them up and they'll be like, oh, this is really awesome. I'll just buy one of these. I'll be like, this is the only way you can get it. And they'll be like, I'll just pay you for this one right now. It's like, sorry.
Yeah.
That's not fair to my patrons. Right. So,
so Brian, trying to think of like what you're going to show to people. I feel like the most important thing in the beginning is you can always change Patreon. So here's a few reasons why I think Patreon is freaking awesome. The first is that they give you the email of everyone who ever backed you. Can you imagine, even if it was just on your Facebook business page or your Instagram business page, if you got the email of every person who followed you? Most social media doesn't want you to have that information, but you're able to then target market. So Patreon has even said, you don't have to use their internal system. If you want to deliver your rewards direct to people's emails in some other way, you have that power. You also get their address if the address is required for delivering things. So you can just decide suddenly, you know what, everybody this month gets a postcard. I'm going to send them all a thank you note, and you can send those out and you have all the information. So Patreon gives creators a great deal of power and control, which is something most formats don't offer, which is, I think, really, really big. But the other thing is you got to be careful, just like with a Kickstarter, where you can screw up the rewards and promise more than you can afford to deliver. And that's both in time and money. And so you want to make sure you're not offering, say, a print that costs you $5 to make, and then you're giving it away instead, or you end up paying more. So you don't want Patreon to be a suck on your income, because also Patreon takes their cut. I think they get 2% or 3% every month.
I think it's 2%.
And then there's also credit card processing fees. So even a $5 backer isn't actually $5 in your pockets. It's more like $4.30 or something, So if you're offering a $5 thing, then you're actually losing 70 cents in that ratio. So anyway, just keeping that in mind. So I'm going to share my screen again and show the rewards that I'm offering and kind of talk about why. So here we go. This is the public facing side of my site where you can see I've got my logo, got my name, talks about what I am, shows kind of this picture of what's going on. At $2 a month, thank you. You get a 10% discount code, and you get early access to sketches, drawings, and works in progress, and all the Patreon exclusive content. So then you go for $5 a month. What do they get that you don't get at $2? Well, you get these digital wallpapers. And so those are pretty easy for me to make, but it's a reward people get, and people really like them. At $10 a month, you get the 20% discount. So it goes up, where in my store, if you bought enough stuff, you could actually save money by going into the Patreon. And some people use it, some people don't. But the other thing I've started doing, and I've only done this for 1 month, I do a monthly hangout where I host a Google Hangout or a Zoom meeting, and everybody gets to show. I think we're hearing your kid there, Alan.
Yeah, I'm sorry, guys.
It's all right. It's all right. It took me a second to realize what was coming through. And so, you with the monthly hangout, it's me and my closest followers, and we just get to talk online and they ask questions. It's about an hour. I switched to this format once conventions ended because of all the virus stuff. And so far it's worked really well. I've had several new backers jump to this level. Another thing I just did at the $30 level is I call it the legacy print. But what that is I'm taking my convention prints and I'm now offering a one print per month at $30 that I mail out. And if it's within the United States, I'm taking on all the shipping costs for that. That's on me. At $75 a month, they get one of my limited edition prints. In addition, still getting the monthly hangout, the 20% discount, the digital wallpapers, it all just kind of builds. And where things really change is at the $100 level, they don't get a print, but they are getting store credit towards the purchase of an original. And that's something I've had a lot of my collectors like. They're like, wait a minute, I'm going to buy a painting from you at Gen Con anyways. Why don't I give you $100 a month so that by the time Gen Con rolls around, I've got $1,000 store credit towards my next big purchase. Now, not everyone's going to go for that. Currently, I have one person at that level. I've had two people at that level in the past, but these are people who buy from me regularly. And if you're not an original artist, that might not be something that works for you. But things like doing hangouts where it feels super intimate and they get to ask all the questions they want to ask. And what I found when I did the chat is that people just wanted to talk to me for that hour we were together, or should I say they wanted me to talk. Like I answered a few questions, but for the most part, people just wanted to ask me a question and then listen to me talk in like 5 to 10 minute blocks, kind of like doing a panel, at least kind of like doing an online panel like we're doing right now. Alan, do you want to throw in on any of like the rewards you find that are easy to manage and work really well?
I mean, the prints, I think people want print. I actually liked your idea for the prints. I stopped sending out prints because it was so hard to manage for me at one point.
Sure.
Limited edition prints are big and I put them in a tube and then drive them out, whatever. But
well, I mean, the difference there is I'm selling limited edition prints off my website and I sell them every week. And so it's just one more order amongst several orders.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I'm still learning that part of it because I have basically rewards that are easy for me that like it's all digital stuff that I send out. It's very small pins, metal cards, bookmarks and stuff like that. And I just recently updated Patreon maybe about 2 weeks ago and I changed all my tiers, but having seen your tiers now, I'm thinking I need to re-update them again. The idea of a hangout or the idea of the discounts is actually not a bad idea at all. I didn't think about those things when I was setting it up. I had something to say earlier, but I can't remember now.
Yeah, and so Joe is saying, I noticed neither of you offer educational rewards. Any thoughts on Patreons that offer critiques, Photoshop files, tutorials? I would say, yeah, those things can absolutely work. The question you want to ask yourself is, how many people can sign up for a critique email or a critique one-on-one with you before you get bombarded? I personally, because of my web show and the videos I release online, I find it hard to take on a mentorship as a part of a Patreon. But I do think offering, if you're digital, offering your layered Photoshop files, people can learn a lot from that, and they love that. And I've seen Pete Moorbacher does that on Angelarium, or he did in the past. So those sorts of things can work really well. It's just when you're doing with tutorial videos, you could release them to your patrons first, and they get them for free, and then you could release them on Gumroad at a cost later on. For a while, I had a thing where all my YouTube videos were unlisted, and so my patrons got to see them for 2 months before I released them online. But I'm finding that hard to manage just because I right now really want the immediate feeling of making a video, releasing a video, and having a real-time conversation. In the past, I wasn't so worried about my YouTube being real-time, but just because of where we are right now and my own need to connect with people, I feel like that's really important at this moment. But I do think there's things like that you could offer where the educational content came out earlier.
I mean, if you want to do that kind of stuff, I definitely would not want to critique. I'm still learning, so I don't feel like I'm even fit to critique anyone's work because people are critiquing my work. So And I thought about doing the digital files with the PSs. I don't know. I'm just half and half on giving away my files, I guess. To me, it feels weird. But I've seen a lot of people do that. I follow 2 or 3 artists who send out layer files, and it's kind of interesting to see their process. But they're also like super famous and super popular and cranking out work, you know.
Well, and it's just another way where people want to connect with you about the materials you use and how you make your stuff. And the more eyes on you and your stuff, the more, you know, that moves forward. Mike C saying, I imagine Twitch streamers would have less interest in a monthly hangout. Yeah, absolutely. And you know, I'm also not sure, like, once we all stop social distancing, will my own monthly hangout be as popular? I don't know. But, you know, right now it's working. And that's the other thing I like about Patreon is, unlike Kickstarter, where you're locked in at a tier once someone buys it, at Patreon, you can change your tiers every single month. So your Patreon can constantly evolve with you as an artist, with you as a business person, and with your fans for what they want. And I've had a great deal of success posting, hey, I'm thinking about doing these things, and post a little poll. What do you guys think? And fans were like, oh, I want the print. Oh, no, I want the hangout. And both of them did really well. But I was like, oh, I guess I'll just do both and let people pick what they want to do.
I found whenever I post a poll, I usually post a poll to get information on what I'm about to change to. And that response is very valuable because you're giving them exactly what they want. Somebody asked a question about not fulfilling orders every month. I forget
like
where it went.
Real life gets in your way or whatever.
Yeah, if you can't come up with a reward.
I've not had that personal problem, but I also am very careful about the number of tangible rewards I offer. The reason a digital hangout is a digital thing I'm offering. It's a little bit of my time, but I've run a web show for 6 years, so I have the equipment and the knowledge base for that. And so that doesn't seem really intimidating or scary to me. Mailing out monthly prints, if that becomes a problem, I'll just change it. But right now I've got 2 people at that level. And so, yeah, I can mail out 2 prints a month. I mean, I normally mail out somewhere between 10 and 20 prints a month anyways. So I've already got all that stuff from managing my online store. And that's a lot of Patreon, I think, is doing what you do best and trying to think of ways you can offer that to your patrons. It's not about, there's not one specific formula that's going to work for everyone.
Yeah. I mean, I try to, all my tiers, I at the end of the month, I have it programmed in. I'm very I have so many notes and stuff that I keep, but at the end of every month, I'm like this, I know which week I'm going to start. The last week of the month is like, this is the week where you're going to package up all your orders and get them ready to go,
Yeah.
And then Patreon does that cool thing where it shows you the benefits, so you know who gets what. So I just kind of go in that system and send out the thank yous, send out the digital stuff, and then make sure everyone's happy.
It was not always this way, but Patreon in its current iteration is very good at helping you manage both tangible and digital rewards. It is gotten so much better at all of that.
I mean, everything you need is there. I mean, and don't I always have people who don't want to set their Patreons because they're like, I'm not ready to do this yet. And like you're saying, it could change all the time. So I tell artists all the time, I say, just set it up and let the tiers evolve as you're learning what works and what doesn't.
That's a great piece of advice, Alan. That's really important. No, keep going. They're just saying.
Oh, okay. Really, I mean, they're worried that their patrons are going to get mad at them if they don't deliver the right product or do the right thing. But I'm like, you're gonna even like I said, I just changed my tiers 2 weeks ago. So I'm constantly thinking, oh, that didn't work, but this worked. Let's change it. And 9 out of 10 patrons they're fine. They're cool with that. And patrons going to come and go. You're like you're basically a store to them at some point, right? So that's just how it works. They'll come back when they can come back. And now, like I said, I'm already thinking about changing stuff after seeing yours because I'm like, those are good ideas. Do I want to do them all? Probably not.
Right. Well, and so the number one thing I want to tell people, the best advice I got when starting a Patreon is offer no rewards. I know that seems silly, but just create a $2 level, a $5 level, and a $10 level. And at each level say, thank you, really thank you, no, really, thank you a lot.
Yeah.
And that's it. And it's because there's a lot of effort that goes into just starting it, and leave it that way for a while and just post content to it regularly. I'd recommend at least 2 posts a week. I typically do 5 posts a week with my Patreon, but I let people see my process because I feel like that's the main thing I'm offering is a true behind the scenes at what I'm doing. But again, that may be different for you, but I feel like just let it start. And you know what? If you only get $8 a month or $9 a month on Patreon, well, high five, man. That's covering Netflix. Like,
well, I always tell people, I'm like, if you're making $8, if you make $5 a month, it's better than 0.
Yeah, I mean,
if you're sitting there not making a Patreon page, you're making $0 right now.
Yeah, and it's a thing that'll grow, and it's a thing you're going to have to learn about. And so, give yourself the time and the space to have a learning curve, and figuring out the rewards is a part of that learning curve. But just getting good images up there and learning to write regularly and get in the habit of posting about your work and finding that balance between what things go on Instagram and what things go on Patreon. And for me, it actually helped my Instagram game a lot because I was like, oh, I want to post this to Instagram on Friday. I haven't shown it to my patrons yet. I better do a Patreon post today so they have at least 4 or 5 days of enjoying that content before I post a version of it to Instagram, which for me has been really helpful because it adds a layer of schedule and discipline to something that I was kind of haphazard about. And the money for me felt like a contract between me and someone else that motivated me, similar to how sometimes paintings that have deadlines are actually easier to get done than the ones that don't, because you're motivated by what you said to another person.
That's a good point.
Yeah, I don't know. But yeah, I mean, I think that's the main thing is, just get yourself started. Don't hold yourself to extremely high standards. Understand that it's a thing that will evolve and grow with you. And I'd say it took me, I had my Patreon for about 6 months before I even really dug in and started advertising it. And then I kept it for about 9 months, 8 months before I ran my first subscription special reward. And so, you can do it once a year for the special reward thing. You can do it every 2 or 3 months. But I really think that this sort of creator-based subscription content is the wave of the future, similar to the way we use subscription services to so many other things. And the more you can think of yourself as a subscription service provider and a community builder, the less it's not you standing on the street corner with your hat out.
You should just run this yourself.
I keep pausing. Like, you can feel free to throw in, Alan.
No, I'm trying. I think I've said everything I know about Patreon. It's just like, I like your idea of doing the 3 tiers of thank yous, because I always tell people to give away some digital work when they sell their tiers, but yeah, why not set up 3 tiers of thank yous, show your artwork, show some of your stories or whatever you want to show, and get people to, I'm trying to remember the name of, I was just talking to somebody about I think they're a Twitch personality or a YouTube personality. They set up their Patreon like last week, and there's just one tier. It was like $5 or something. They don't share anything on their Patreon. There's nothing there. It all just, goes back to their YouTube page, essentially, right? People go there to see them, or their Twitch channel. But the Patreon is set up as the, the tip jar for them.
Well, so I mean, that's why Patreon was created. Is the guy who came up with the idea had just released a YouTube video that got over 1 million views in its first day, and I think he said it was like $500 on the advertising, or $150 on the advertising.
Yeah, it's something really low,
depressingly low. And he had the same thing of like, okay, what if 1 million people just chipped in $1? But in reality, you're not going to get 1 million people. But if 500,000 people chipped in $1, if 250,000 people chipped in $1, even if just 1% of people of 1 million people chip in $1, that can support a creator. And so Patreon is trying to create a platform where the advertisers and the social media platform are not the one taking advantage of all of us artists who are the content creators. Like, we don't love YouTube because it's YouTube. We love YouTube because there are content creators out there that we really respect. And if we could, you know, we think, oh, I'll watch this ad, it gives them a little money. But if you could just give them a little money and avoid all of those ads, I know for many content creators, I would do that. For webcomics, there's certain webcomics I would do that for. You know, just other artists, and that's who I support mostly on Patreon is other artists as well. But that sort of freedom that it can give us as creators is really great. So Brian's asking us, how much time would you say you spend on Patreon content per month? Alan?
I mean, all the content that's going on Patreon is also the content for the series that I'm working on.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, if I try, my goal has always been to finish one piece a month. I don't draw as fast as some of my artist friends. So, you know, one piece a week would be bananas for me. It's probably possible if I didn't have, you know, a kid and a bunch of stuff happening, but one piece a month. So usually I try, you know, I spend, you know, a week to, you know, 2 weeks to 3 weeks working on the art. Most of the stories are ready to rock and roll. So it's just a matter of saying, here's a story that's going with this piece of artwork, and then putting together the page and then getting it ready to launch. And in between all that, that's the main Patreon post for the month. But in between all that, I try my best to post once a week to just say what's going on, what am I working on, what's new, some information. But now that I'm thinking about this, in the middle of all this, it would be a good idea to show some of the process in between on a weekly basis. People might like to actually see that.
So for me, it's about an hour. I'd say an hour a week, give or take. And I do it when I'm on my game. Let's not talk about right now, but in the before times, I would get on usually on a Monday afternoon or Sunday afternoon, ideally, if I haven't been traveling. And I'll spend an hour prepping Patreon posts. And Patreon is amazing because they have a really good scheduling feature built in. So I could schedule a week, or if you want, you could schedule an entire month's worth of content and batch all your tasks and then just be done with it, except for responding. And then you're able to, you know, batch your tasks. And I do it at the same time I'm planning out my Instagram posts, because I'll actually batch those out a week at a time as well. So that's why the two content kind of goes together. But, you know, it like anything, you could sink a lot of time into it, particularly if you're fulfilling a whole lot of orders. Brian's wondering, is there anything that you dislike about Patreon?
There's one thing I dislike about it, and
Yeah.
it's their mobile app.
Yeah.
It's very, I think it's still in like early phases of being developed. It's not good for post. It's great to look at content. Like when you post, Sam, I look at it on my phone, I'll see it, I'll read it, and I can comment, works fine. But when I'm trying to do a post, it's so like kludgy when you're typing. It's not intuitive. You can't schedule on the mobile app, which is frustrating. Like if you have an idea for a post, and you're like, I'm gonna schedule this later. Doesn't work. You can do drafts on there. I've done things where I type up things and I save it as drafts. So I'm like, I'm gonna write this draft. I'm gonna sit at my desktop later and write it up, and the draft is completely gone. And you're like, what did I think about? I forgot what I wrote, you know? So I've gotten really good at taking those notes into Google Keep and saving them there. Just a side note for you guys. But yeah, I love everything about it except I've posted on social and I've called them out on it, and I've talked to their tech people, and they're always like, oh, it's your Android phone. Let's run through these tests, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, no, it's not, man. Just fix it.
So I know for me, my least favorite feature is that they do not have an easy way for people to sign up in real time at my booth. That's the main thing, is if they had an app that was just like, enter your email. Yeah. And the problem though with creating that, the challenge is that someone has to enter their credit card information. And so that's a whole delicate, but like, I've talked about how you get the free thing if you sign up in my booth. Well, what that actually looks like is someone usually stepping to the side or standing in my booth for like 10 minutes, occasionally talking to me while they try to figure that out so they can get their free thing, which means
So,
someone's really got to want their bottle opener for them to
yeah.
sit there for 10 minutes. And people do it. Thank goodness that they do. But it's still, if there was a streamlined format for that, that would make me happy.
So I talked to, they have Patreon events here in Chicago, like every 2 or 3 months when we were allowed to have events here. I've actually hung out with Conti, the owner, right? Or is he the president? I don't know what his official title is, but I talked to him about that idea back in the year or so ago, where I said, can you somehow sync it up with Square, which is something we all use, right, at these conventions? And he said something to me like he has been discussing with Square on a way to sync it up. So I'm hoping in the future, I'm assuming the mobile app and Square will sync up somehow, and we can run a transaction really quick. And then
That'd be awesome.
That would be amazing, because it'll be but the thing is, and when I was discussing with them, I was like, you should figure it out so people can go on later and fill out their information, because that's the thing that's taking the time. You need to get their email address, you need to get their
it's a lot.
phone number, at least, if you want that information.
So we're actually at the last minute. Mike said that we needed to wrap this up around the 45-minute mark, because there's another panel happening in here at 7. There is one final question we'll take here from Brian saying, have we ever had any unhappy patrons? If so, how would you handle that? Or do you find that most people understand what their money is going towards since they are using this platform?
I don't really.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, Mike's gonna post this later, just so you guys know. He'll share it.
Yep. It's gonna be on the Aridani YouTube.
I have not had unhappy customers. I've had customers who basically were like, I can't afford to do this anymore, and they bounce out of. It's not just me. You'll see they bounce out of everyone, right? Just went straight down the board. I have had one customer where I sent him a limited edition piece and it showed up damaged, but I just replaced it and they were super chill. I'm lucky enough that most of my customers have been really chill.
That's been my experience too, is that the hardest thing is explaining what Patreon is and getting people on it. But once your fans get on it, most of them fall in love with it. Who loves mine the most is actually my mother. She loves the fact that she's like, oh, my son sends me an email about what he's doing almost every day. This is so great. And so I think if all of our fans have my mom's mentality of what if this artist that you think is super cool were to send you an email that you looked forward to every couple of days, most of us would be like, yeah, that doesn't sound too bad at all. That sounds pretty great. And so,
I love getting messages like, your stuff's awesome. Look at it. There's a bunch of artists I follow where I'm just like, oh, cool. They got a new piece, or, oh, there's a new, magic card out. It's fun. Yeah. And, I don't follow anyone I don't like. So who would do that? You're
not going to go through the hassle of all the credit card and email questions for someone that you don't like.
Right.
So, I don't know. I think it's much harder to get people to buy in than it is to keep them once they've been around for a month or more. So, yeah. All right. Alan, any closing thoughts so we can wrap this up for the Aridani crew?
Sorry, I'm not as informative as Sam. But
sexy in those elf ears.
Oh, I keep forgetting these are still on. You can't really feel them. If you haven't set up a Patreon or thinking about it, just do it. Take Sam's idea of the 3 tiers. That's actually a brilliant idea, and just start it out. But also, I used Sam's idea early on when I started too. I reached out to friends and family and I said, hey, can you guys support me at the low tier? At this point, it's $2, and I just said for 3 months, and almost everyone said yes. So when I launched my Patreon, I had about 35 people on there already. So,
nice. Yeah, that's it.
That's it. I mean, and don't stress it. It should be fun.
Absolutely. Well, guys, I'm Sam Flegel. If you want to check out my Patreon, you can go to patreon.com/Sam Flegel, or you can see my art at fatefulsigns.com. Another shout out and thank you to the Aridani crew, Mike, Paul, and Sarah, for setting this whole thing up. This has been an amazing event, and I'm really proud to have been a part of it.
And I'm Alan Panakal. If you want to check out my stuff, it's at ancientones.net. If you guys really like my work, I'm going to be launching a Kickstarter in about a week. If you follow me on Patreon, you'll hear a lot more about it. If you don't, just go to my website.
There you go. All right. Well, thank you
Thanks.
guys for joining us. Those of you who are here live, thank you. And if you're watching this later, thank you so much. And I guess we just close out here. Is that all we got to do?
I think if you hit leave meeting, it just bounces everybody out.
Oh, man.
Oh, Mike said he's got us.
Okay. Good deal. All right. In that case, goodbye, everybody. We love you. Stay safe.
Wash your hands.